You will know pain. Be gone. I will bathe this world in blood. Swift death. You will know pain.
One example is this reworked version of Wraithlord. It has 4 abyss sockets.
That was the moment right there. It was a month ago, almost exactly to the day, March 21st, where they revealed the Wraithlord item, and I looked at it, I read it, I did a double take, and I said, oh, I finally get to play my favorite archetype in the entire game. Not, you know, skeletons, not Zoomancer, none of that stuff. An actual, just pure Spectre build. My favorite archetype was finally back, and I'm not gonna lie, I wouldn't say emotional, but I felt that wave of nostalgia you feel maybe when you see your game get remastered and such. And so, if you'll indulge me, I'd like to take you on a little small quick pivot to give you a little bit of that nostalgia feeling as well. So over here, we have in this tab, let's go back in time. It's September 26th, 2020. K Gaming has uploaded a video about Syndicate operatives being cold converted. And as you can see, just skimming through this video, they're fast, they clear, and they do way too much damage. And this was the last time Spectres were genuinely like a meta build, like a build we can look at and say, oh, you're playing the meta build Spectres. Oh, that's cringe. You know, because obviously everything that gets meta is a little bit cringe. Let's be real, even if it's your favorite build, sometimes, you know, when they're at the top for too long, they're a little cringe. After this, Spectres were pretty much just gutted, and we have these Spectres we have now where you just run like Zoomancer and stuff. Up your Spectre build just kind of died out. Then we got a little brief life, you know, last league with Hydras, and then obviously they're gone, so they died again. Fast forward to present day, I was able to finally buy a Wraithlord. They were 15 div in hardcore trade. They're 30C in softcore, if you were curious. I did a ton of research into a bunch of Spectres people had tried. I looked at a lot of footage of a ton of Spectres people have been uploading, and I was trying to find a Spectre that kind of worked. I didn't want to play Defiled because their screen clutter was too bad. I didn't want to play a Spectre we've already played in the past because I don't know, that just kind of felt boring. You know, I'm just using an old Spectre for a current day thing. I don't roll that way. And eventually I went on PoE Ninja. I seen a guy named Oscrix, and he had an interesting Wraith Spectre setup. It implied that he was playing some sort of poison build. And so I did more research. I spent a couple hours looking through all of the Spectres, kind of like how they work, their numbers and stuff, going through the footage to see if it looked like it would have some sort of damage or maybe looked fun. The only thing I got from him was the name of the Spectres. Outside of that, his version of the build and mine are completely different. I made a Necromancer with different defenses. He played a Jug with completely different defenses, and we had nothing unlike, but thanks for the Shamans. Honestly, that was really helpful to save me a lot of time. The other thing, right here, we have the Shamans. I'm just gonna call them Shamans from now on. I'm not pronouncing this. You can't make me. You're not my mom. They have 40 Chaos Res. They're somewhat tanky in terms of HP. They're not nearly as tanky as other Spectres, but they're not the squishiest either. And they only have 1 attack. These are not used. These are turned off for whatever reason. And this is Poisonous Concoction, which means anything you know about Poisonous Concoction works on a Spectre, overlapping, shotgunning, and they have this right here, always poison on hit. If you've ever played a Poison SRS build, your little light bulb should have ticked by now. Now we'll explain a lot more in detail how we scale it and everything like that in the build section. But the number one thing I want you to know about these guys is that I will not sit here and tell you, hey, these are the best Spectres ever. No, they can do a lot of damage. I believe that my version is about 15 million damage. I'll explain later. And my damage version with a Covenant is probably 20 to 24 million damage. I'm sorry, it's really hard to tell with, you know, numbers because I can't just look at the numbers and tell you, but I'm guesstimating. And these guys will not be in the game next league. They come from an All Flame. The name of the All Flame and this PoEDB link is going to be in the notes section on POB. But these guys come from an All Flame, which means they only come from the All Flame. They are not going to be in the game next league. Just how Hydras were before, these guys will not be in the game. So if you want to try them, you have to try them right now. I also want to say that, hey, these guys and all this testing for Spectres and stuff took a lot of time. It took a lot of effort. Normally, I feel a little cringe about doing this, but I'm going to be honest, when I spend this much time on something and this much effort, I am proud of kind of like completing these guys. They're not the fastest build or anything. They don't even do the most damage, but ultimately, I am proud of completing this. And so I am going to ask like, hey, if you want to support me, a like and a sub will actually go pretty far, and I would appreciate it. And I also got help from a friend a lot this league, and especially with this build. His name's Johnny. None of you guys know who he is, but he's a good friend of mine. I've played the games with him for a long time, so thank you, Johnny. I know you're watching this. I appreciate it. You helped a lot. Now, enough of that. Let's move on. Fast forward to a couple hours later when I put on my Wraithlord, and well, the footage should be playing right now, and I immediately knew, okay, yep, these guys are kind of nuts. I didn't need to see anymore. I bought some jewels, I bought some gear, I 6-linked my chest because I just wanted to see how it would feel for leveling, and from that point on, I was hooked. Now, if you've never seen one of my build guides before, I'm going to try to give you as much info as I can, so timestamps are going to be where you can find your quick info. But this is going to be kind of an FAQ. Off the top of my head, I'm going to try to think of any questions somebody would ask me, and ideally I answer them, and if I don't, feel free to ask in the YouTube comments. I'm not against answering them, but my sleep schedule is terrible, so I may not answer immediately. I'll try my best. You know, it is what it is, brother. Now, the first question I think you should ask is, hey, how expensive would, you know, the Wraithlord be, for example? And it's 20 chaos. You can buy it, you can level with it. This whole time, obviously, I've had leveling, you know, stuff going on, and it's great. I had no problems. As you can see, it's very smooth. You can wear the same stuff from beginning to end. You just put on volley or LMP while leveling, and then you switch to greater volley ideally because it's the best support for their clear / overlapping damage. And if you were curious why this build ended up being, you know, 100 div and stuff, is because this is how much I had to buy a Wraithlord for on hardcore Necropolis, and I had to wait a day and a half for someone to log on and sell one because every time I logged on, nobody was on to sell it. If you want the cost of, you know, a basic 4th vow low end, obviously, you know, 90C and stuff. If you want obviously better rolls, you're gonna have to pay more for better rolls. Same thing with the Glorious Vanity. It's gonna be, you know, more expensive for a decent Glorious Vanity. But aside from this, there's really nothing too expensive. The only thing that I would say would be the next expensive thing was gonna be a +1 fracture minion shield. You can Necropolis craft one. We'll talk about all this later, but this would probably be the most expensive piece because it's a little bit important to get your Spectre to 25 if you're not going to go for, you know, corrupted +2 minion stuff on your chest. So in terms of cost, I don't know, in order to just play like a crappy version of this, 10, 15 div, and I have 2 versions, one for more damage and one for lower damage. The higher damage version is Covenant setup. The lower damage one is 4th vow, but it's tankier, so pick whichever one you want. If you want more damage, if you want to be a little bit tankier, both are fine. Obviously, as a hardcore player, I played 4th vow. I think the next question you'd want to know is why these Spectres? Why not the Defiled Spectres? Why not a Crush Claw or a Drowned or, you know, any of these other ones? It's very simple. Screen clutter is a big deal. The Defiled are very good. I am not even against trying them, but the screen clutter was awful. I couldn't see anything when I looked at them. And they didn't really seem to me like they had special stuff going on for them against the boss. Not that you can't make them do a ton of damage, but it was just, you know, a single target return projectiles. You know, it was kind of like, it was okay. I wanted something more stronger for bosses, and that's when these guys ended up shining. Their screen clarity is not the best in the world, you know, but it's PoE, so, you know, it's about as good as I could ideally hope for with a pure Spectre build. The biggest negative of this is that they're clear. Their clear is not bad. Right now, future me will hopefully have remembered to put the T16 map I ran. This is just a standard 6 mod Jungle Valley with a Delirium Orb on it. Nothing special, and as you can see, the clear is fine. This is with an Unending Hunger to try to help with the clear to get that Soul Eater buff, and it's okay. It's not amazing, it's not the best, it's not the worst, it's just kind of mid. You know, it's nothing special. If you're doing, you know, high-end tier 17s, then it's a little bit better because obviously those mobs are really tanky and they still will, you know, consistently do this high-end damage. But for like just tier 16 speed farming, these are not what these guys are not. They're not made for that. At that point, I would probably say maybe a Defiled would be better, or the Chaos Overlappers. I don't know what their name is off the top of my head. So, you know, this is definitely their weak point, is clear. In terms of an FAQ, that's about all I can think of. Because PoB doesn't have their damage numbers, there's, you know, kind of a limited amount of information. I can only tell you what I learned through, you know, trial and error. I think the last thing I'd say is the more damage version is probably about 60% more damage versus the 4th vow setup, if you wanted at least an idea of the numbers. So there you go. And that's about it. Let's just let's get into the PoB and talk build. Now, this is not that extensive. We're wearing a lot of uniques and stuff, so it's really not too complicated, but this is the Covenant version. So if you're going to swap between stuff, you have the Covenant here, and then obviously in the skill section, you have a Covenant version. So make sure you're on the right version. I'll explain the differences in a second, but, you know, let's switch to the 4th vow version. This minion tree is pretty average. There's nothing special here. We do have to run Eldritch Battery manually, which kind of forces us to the top right side of the tree, unless you want to drop Eldritch Battery completely. And that would be because Wraithlord obviously is a helmet. Now, Wraithlord's a very good item, +2 Spectres. You cannot have known Spectre minions. So, you know, an AG would obviously be really cool, but we can't have him, so we gotta work with what we got. Which means we really need as many auras to kind of buff them as we can, or we need to just get really, really tanky and invest tons and tons of divines into jewels. I had limited amount of money, so I did a middle ground where I invested a lot into some jewels, and then I kind of just tried to make up my tankiness with what I had available. So this is not the final version of the character at all. This is just the final version I left off on. You can absolutely do a lot better than what I did here for another 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 div. You know, Spectre / minion builds kind of don't have a ceiling on terms of like how far they can go, right? But this version should be around the 15 million damage mark. And that's just from me testing characters that had 16, 17 million damage on Maven and then a 13 million damage version on Maven. This build was in the middle between those two clear times. So I'm sitting around, I'd say 14 to 16 if you want to give a ballpark low, you know, low end, high end. Now let's just start with the uniques, nothing special. We won't talk about the rares yet. Severed in Sleep. We're using this because of Withered on hit. Now, because there's so much you can try to change, I'm going to give you ideas alongside giving you why I'm running this. So this is because of Wither and Envy. Envy is the equivalent of a level 5 Awakened Added Chaos. It's insane. You link this with Generosity and stuff. It's a ton of damage, absolutely insane amount of damage. And then the Wither just is nice. However, you could drop that where a +1/+1 typical minion wand, and then you have to give something up. You either give up Mistress of Sacrifice or Commander of Darkness, and you can take Unnatural Strength. Now, we do not do physical damage. We're a spell with poison, but you still get that Wither on hit. And when you have, you know, 9 Spectres that are overlapping, 3 each, you have, you know, 28 or so projectiles, or maybe more, maybe less, depending on the overlapping, that are withering on hit. So Wither you can solve with just this and run a +1/+1 weapon. You would lose Envy, but you know, a double +1 weapon should absolutely be more damage than a Severed in Sleep would. But like I said, I had to go down the middle ground. I kind of had 100 div to work with. I ran out of money, so this is what I settled on. After that, obviously we just have a Wraithlord. I didn't corrupt it or anything. It's just a +2. You know, it's really good and valuable because we need to get Wraith Spectre to level 25. The fourth vow is just your basic, you know, armor stacking. If you don't know how this works, I mean, I've explained it many times at this point, but you just armor stack and then you wear a Glorious Vanity to fix your armor, your Fizz damage, and your LE max hit all at once, which is why I want to go for as much armor as I can. The Jinx Juju, obviously we're running Spectres. This has Curse Effect, Chaos Res. It's kind of just an overall middle ground between damage and defense. You could run a +3 Spectre Amulet. You could also run an All's Uprising. My plan was to run an All's Uprising and a +1/+1 weapon, but ultimately an All's Uprising was just too expensive and I wasn't 100% convinced of the damage, so I just went with the Jinx Juju to be safe. Your standard Darkness and Throne, nothing specialized there. Energized Armor, we're armor stacking, so of course you can run an Armor Parandus here, but it's only like 10% better, but it is better if you wanted to, you know, be a min-max handy. Amanu's Gaze, we are doing poison guaranteed on hit, so an Amanu's Gaze is very good. Green Nightmare in this position right there is my favorite Green Nightmare. It's very cool. You get to get, you know, block. You put that tattoo 6% cold res here, and this makes our suppression go up even more. And you just slap it right here. It's just a really efficient, good spot to put it. I love it when I can put it right here. It's one of my favorites. Glorious Vanity. My Glorious Vanity is terrible. This thing is awful. I had limited supply to work with. There was 3 Glorious Vanities for sale. Only one of them had a useful node, and that was it. This is 8% life. You would like armor, % Fizz damage, chaos, 1% chaos res, or minion damage. I mean, hell, even suppression would be valuable here. I settled on 8% life. It's all I had to work with. You can obviously get way better. Make sure that it's a Zabakwa and you take Divine Flesh right here. My Watcher's Eye only has one thing useful on it. Armor Determination. You could go Fizz damage reduction Determination. Ideally, if I could pick one, I would have went both flat armor and % Fizz damage reduction on Determination, just to, you know, be efficient on it. But this is the best I could get. It is what it is. And the classic Storm Shroud to get your ailment immune. If you ever want to know how much ailment immune you have, you go over here. It's other avoidance, and right here you can kind of look it up and see I have 2 jewels with avoid elements, and that's how I'm getting it. Now, the shield. I Necropolis crafted this. You do not need the % life, you do not need the Fizz damage reduction. What I was hoping to get was +1 tier 1 minion damage fractured. Obviously I didn't get that. I have the footage of when I crafted it right here and kind of what the stats looked like, but you can just buy a +1 minion skill gems fractured. It's about 3 divines. It's cheaper than doing the Necropolis craft, trust me. And you can either use bound fossils, until you hit, you know, high tier fizz damage and good HP, and then you just craft suppression. I didn't go for any res, I didn't care about any of that. I just wanted life, percent damage, and 10% suppress. That's it. I didn't want to try to make an insane level shield where I need res or fire or cold. Nope. I think that's just too much to ask for. Your shield is here to do one thing, and that's to give you +1 and give you damage. So I tried to make it simple on myself. Hopefully this makes it easier on you too. Just bound fossils, that's about it. After this, let's just talk about the jewels. All of the jewels are essentially the same except for a shock jewel. So, you know, right here we have one shock jewel. Because we have so many ghastlies, you can actually run 2 decent ghastlies with some sort of, you know, avoid shock on them. And then your boots will have either avoid ailments or avoid shock on those as well. So you can get 100% ailment immunity. But you just roll these with yellow harvest juice. Chaos, that's it. It's 100 per pop. These are pretty expensive. I would recommend that you always do fractures. Some of these I just, you know, got lucky on crafting fairly easy like this one, but none of these are insane. They're just life, attack speed with chaos, and then, you know, chaos with minion damage. In terms of what gives you the most damage, now I don't have a POB to tell you, you know, improve this to you, but just from the history of playing a bunch of minion builds, I can tell you for a fact the highest damage increase will be flat damage. So in this case, chaos damage. The next damage increase is always, and this is always, percent minion damage if you used a minion skill recently. And then after that, it's going to be attack speed, cast speed. So try to, you know, set those up in any certain way and get your avoid shock on these and you're good to go. Don't be lazy on the 4th row rolls. That percent armor and that chaos res is really helpful, but obviously if you're broke, work with what you have. You can get a +2 4th vow minions. Obviously that would be insane, really good. Obviously I didn't have the ability to do that, but you can do what I couldn't. It also goes for the Covenant. +2 on a Covenant would also be insane. The gloves and the boots are very simple. They're just essence crafted. No Necropolis stuff here. Just capping your suppression, life. I needed a little bit of dex. I did not need 47 dex, but, you know, I rolled it and I was like, yeah, that's cool. And the boots, same thing. I only needed 10% suppression, which is why I only have 10% suppression. Do not get baited by having your quartz flask on. I almost always turn this off when I'm planning my gear. I had just enough suppression, so it worked out. And I just got some generic crappy boots. Nothing special. Sapped ground is less damage taken if they're on sapped ground, so just another layer of defense. There's really nothing else to put here. You could put bone offering effect or flesh offering if you're running flesh offering effect. That's about it. Your rings, get fractures on bone rings. You know, this is the league of fractures, so, you know, get your fractured life tier 1 ideally. My rings suck. You've probably noticed that, hey, like these boots kind of suck too. Yeah, my gear is actually not that good. It's kind of just settling gear. I fertiled this bone ring and then I prismaticed this bone ring. I needed res on this one, and then I needed health on this one. So when crafting these, you can either do one or the other. You can do a bound fossil, nothing special, or you can use blue juice caster or yellow juice speed. I think speed is 150, so it's a bit more expensive, but caster is 75. So, you know, pick whichever one you want. That's how I craft them. Nothing special. These rings do suck. You can probably notice that, you know, a lot of my gear is just like, okay, they're not perfect jewels. Nothing here is actually perfect. None of these are double corrupted. It's pretty much just like, I'd say like lower high-end gear, if that makes sense. Ideally, right, I would have the attack speed on this ring, and then I would have percent minion damage on this ring, and I would have a ton more damage. To leave you a little bit in the, you know, behind the scenes, these gloves are actually better than the gloves I have. My gloves did not have percent minion damage on either one because I just never bothered to fix them. So I put these here so you will have 50% more damage than I did. I had a lot less damage than you, and it's just one of those things where I'm stupid and lazy and I just didn't bother fixing it, but you should fix it and do it correctly. Don't do what I do, do as I say, because I'm pretty lazy. Obviously as good as a Darkness Throned, and then you put your best jewels here, high life, you know, your quad damage or whatever. Obviously my jewels are pretty mid, so these are what I got. And the last two big things, these are always very expensive. These are definitely the most expensive part of your gear. You do not need an eye level 84 large cluster, but obviously it's the best way to get the best damage. Ideally, you get an 84 cluster jewel, 2 of them with 12 passives, and then you roll these with either speed, harvest juice, or caster harvest juice. I used caster because it was more cost efficient for me. And obviously, again, ideally you would have fractured them. There was literally not enough of these in the market for me to buy and start fracturing to try to make really good jewels. But ideally, you would have 35%, 3%, and then life. I didn't get those. I got res and I got dex, which was useful and allowed me to, you know, put them on and fix some of my problems with res and dex, but ideally these would have had 5 or 6 life and I would have had another 200 to 300 HP depending on the roll, which would have been really nice. So you can obviously get more health out of these than I did. You could have gotten a better Glorious Vanity than I did. You can make better rings than I did. So there's a lot of room for you to improve on where I just left off. You can get, you know, tier 1 HP on this if you want to spend the time and money to try to make it. Now, aside from that, there's really not that big of a difference between the Fourth Vow and the Covenant version. On to the Covenant version, we're actually going to talk about skill gems now. I think this is a good time because the Covenant and the Fourth Vow versions are pretty similar. So the Fourth Vow version, you're just running Envy in your weapon. You're going to link this with Divine Blessing and Generosity because Envy is an aura, it's a ton of damage, and it's the only reason I even bothered trying to run a Severed in Sleep. Your Spectre is pretty straightforward. You run Predator for bosses, and then you run minion damage for clear. It's a one-way gem swap, not that big a deal. Predator helps a lot because their AI is a bit dumb. That's just like most minions. If you don't constantly like keep cursing something, or if you convocation them, they'll probably stop attacking the boss, and that's bad. So Predator lasts like 15 seconds. It's just very straightforward. You click it on the boss, and there you go. You're already using like so little buttons because you're just a pure Spectre build. So it's really not that big a deal. You're running Despair over Temporal Chains. Typically Despair is the better curse first off, and then Temporal Chains is really, really good with Despair. And the Covenant version will run Temp Chains and Despair, whereas this version we're just running one curse. Pick between Flesh Offering or Bone Offering. It doesn't really matter which one. If you want more damage, you know, Flesh Offering. If you want to be tankier, Bone Offering. Your defensive auras, we are running Tempest Shield, not for the shock. We already solved the shock immune, but we just want that block, right? 5660 is pretty good. Cancel for damage taken, Molten Shell. Now, here's the thing. Technically speaking, you could run automation, endurance charges, and obviously this character goes crazy, right? We go from 29k to 34k with Flasks on. That's really good. 30k plus is, we're in territory where I'm comfortable getting hit by a Uber Eater, you know, auto attack, and I'll survive that at that point. Unfortunately, what do you give up, right? Wraithlord has to take 4 slots away. So you'd have to run an unset ring to try to make it work. You would probably also have to either drop Defiance Banner or cancel damage taken. So what I was thinking is maybe you run an unset ring or something like that, and you try to move the gems around and you run automation, Molten Shell, Enduring Cry. The other way is, you know, drop Defiance Banner straight up and then try to make the reservation work with like a level 4 Enlighten, and you can maybe save points and stuff. So I never did it, so I'm not gonna, you know, tell you what to do, but you can fit Enduring Cry in here. You just have to figure out what do you want to give up, and at that point make your choice and go for it. There's no wrong way to play a build. There's no wrong way to play this build. There's tons of ways. This is just my version of trying to be tanky and still get that damage to be comfortable. Feel free to break the entire tree and say, hey Waff, this was stupid, I don't know why you did that, do this instead. Go for it. I'm not going to be ashamed or feel bad. What you want this build to do is ultimately up to you, but no matter what you do, it will not be the best clear build. However, you can always do more damage. Speaking of more damage, let's talk about Covenant. Now make sure you always switch these accordingly. Do not mess this up. You will sit here and break everything if you do not have the right things ticked. The biggest difference between Covenant is that you get added Chaos level 29 built into it, which means you open up another link. Now, what would be the link for it? Most likely, from what I'm understanding, just how P-Conc works, because it is Poisonous Concoction, so you just use, you know, secondhand knowledge of Poison Concoction. If you were to have a 7 link, you can go for 2 things. You can just go for Control Destruction, and obviously you can just test this yourself, in my opinion, using Maven as a test bench, because she has multiple phases where she starts on, you know, full HP, and you can time how fast she, you know, she'll kill you, or how fast you'll kill her. Wrong words. You can, you know, test between these two which one's actually better. I'm going to take a guess that Awaken GMP would be better than GMP and then Control Destruction. Hey, could be wrong. You can obviously test this. I don't have access to, you know, Awaken GMP, so I didn't bother doing this test, and I wasn't wearing a Covenant, so kind of a pointless test for me because I would have had to have dropped on Unbound Elements, and I already know that this is one of the best supports for poison in the game. No way I was taking that off to test. Aside from that, you are running an unset ring on this version. Obviously, these are not rings I had, so I just put these together, what I wanted. Same thing, you know, bound fossils or caster crafting, and then, you know, fix your reses up, get your chaos res capped. We are running an Eternal Damnation, which on the good news side means you need, you know, 5, 10, 15, 20% less res. The bad news obviously is that, well, it's going to be a little bit less tanky, but hey, if you're wearing a Covenant, 60k plus LE hit, honestly, that's pretty good on a, you know, in my opinion at least. Like, I'd be fine getting hit by Cirrus Beam and I'd probably survive with this much spell block and this much LE hit, so good enough for me. I didn't play this version, but if I was going to do this, this is how I would have did it. I still think you anoint and venerate. The suppression is really, really tight. It's really hard to cap suppression. Obviously, there's corruptions on suppression, maybe like boots that you could potentially go for. But the big gain is Temp Chains. You get to run Temp Chains, which is insane for poison stacking. You're running a Covenant with on a 7 link. but we have to manually get Whispers of Doom because I don't think you can afford to anoint Whispers of Doom unless maybe you wanted to go like Lucky Suppression and then like not have 100% suppression, but in my opinion that's suicide and you should not do that. The biggest change is, hey, the tree's a little bit different, and that is a Militant Faith. Now obviously this is like a perfect, in theory, Militant Faith, attack speed, minion, and then curse aura. It's not needed, you do not need that, but you know, these are just here for you to look for stuff like this. And then this gives you a ton of armor. So if you look at our armor right here, it's based off of our base mana. So we have 0 mana, but we're Eldritch Battery, so you know, who cares? Turn this off, we go down to 32k armor, turn it on, you're up to 41k armor. It's a lot of armor, and it helps get us into a comfortable fizz damage reduction. Obviously this is not nearly as tanky as I wish it was. There's only so much I could do, right? If you're playing this version, you just want to do even more damage, so knock yourself out. I stand by this version. These are versions of stuff I've used in the past. I just hadn't tried Covenant with this Spectre. But this is what I would do if I wanted more DPS. The last thing I think we can mention is Unending Hunger. You can run this, or you can run a normal Ghastly Jewel, depending on what content you're doing. Unending Hunger is really good for mapping, not really useful at all for bossing. So if you want, you can swap the jewel out, or you can just put it on and leave it on, and you know, there you go, and just never think about it. Up to you, your choice, your build. And ultimately, that should be it. Aside from these Spectres just not having the best clear, they're really good at bosses. They're good at T17s. This whole time, obviously, you've seen, you know, me fighting all the bosses. I accomplished my goal with this build, and I was really proud of it. They're not the best in the world, right? Like, it's not the fastest build. It doesn't do the most single target damage, but man, I just like them. I just like the playstyle of just having pure Spectres. I think the only thing I can really say at this point is that you can run a Spectral Leader instead of 8 Shamans. I didn't bother doing it because, I don't know, I just wanted pure Shamans, and the arena, you know, the Spectral Leader's kind of lame sometimes. He isn't standing directly on top of them, and, you know, he's kind of goofing off, but most of the time he's on top of them for bosses, at least, because, you know, you're using Predator, so he'll stand still. So that could be a big damage increase as well, but other than that, any experimentation you want to do, or let me know, like, hey, I found this cool trick out with them or something, let me know. This is the final version for me. I enjoyed it. I liked it. I got my pure Spectre gameplay out of my system, and I'm ready to move on to whatever my brain cooks up next. So hopefully this was helpful to you or somebody out there. I will ask for a sub and a like because this took a lot of time and effort. You know, POB not having the numbers, it just really makes it a pain to figure everything out. You have to test everything and go off of secondhand information and, you know, POB information, and you're kind of like, is this true? Is it not? All right, well, I'm going to spend 15 div and see if it was true, and then it works out and you're happy. Or unfortunately, if it doesn't work out and you're sitting here kind of frustrated. So a lot of trial and error with this, but ultimately I'm pretty happy with the result. The other Spectres are pretty good too. All you could do is, you know, swap out the jewels from like Chaos to Lightning, and you'd pretty much already be ready for the Defiled Spectres. Anyway, have a good one. Hopefully this was helpful. I'll catch you later.